Now, traps in D&D are surprises you find in dungeons or villainous hideouts occasionally, and the official rulebooks only give specifics on how a trap should function, but don't go too in detail about the different types you can set up. So in this video, we'll be going over some of the best traps you can add to your game from various different sources, which will all be kept hidden as to not give away any spoilers to modules or where they might have come from. And to start this off, let's go over a very simple trap. At number 10, we have the second pit trap. The setup for this one is very simple. Simply have an open pit trap in the middle of a narrow hallway. Then have a hidden pit trap right beyond the open one. Characters will walk up to the open pit trap and then either try to jump over it or go around. And then once they get to the other side, the first character there will immediately fall into the second concealed pit trap and take whatever kind of damage is appropriate for the campaign you're running. They have guidelines in the DMG about appropriate DCs and damage for traps based on your tier, so it's really easy to adjust that. The second pit trap basically plays on the false sense of security. Since players will see an obvious trap, they won't be as likely to suspect a second trap immediately afterwards, so they're more likely to fall for it. And some of the best ways to just reiterate on traps is to simply combine a couple of them. And at number 9, we have the Falling Portcullis trap. This is a very simple trap that just has all kinds of applications. The basic trigger is just someone stepping on a pressure plate, and the effect is an iron portcullis drops from somewhere, locking an exit or passageway. Now, the falling portcullis could be used in conjunction with a creature encounter, in order to create a sense of extra danger where they think they're trapped in. They could also just be triggered with another creature coming out. However, some of the best uses for the falling portcullis trap is for someone to step on the trigger and then not actually know what happened, because the trigger actually dropped down a portcullis at the entrance to the dungeon, and the adventurers won't know they're trapped in until they try to retreat, which could either be deadly to them if they're trying to run away from a hard encounter, or a minor inconvenience as they just have to undo the portcullis before leaving. However, I think the best use of this is in conjunction with other traps, which is why I have it on the list. And it's simple enough to counter. You just simply have to have a group work together in order to lift it up. Or just have a Thieves' Tools check to disable it, and the portcullis can be as heavy or as light as you think is appropriate for your players. And at number 8, we have the bear trap. Now, I'm sure everybody knows what a bear trap is, however, this spot is a little bit of a twist on the usual simple trap. What you do is have a simple bear trap set out in the open, not even trying to hide. And then if a player tries to disable it, it activates the real trap, which drops down a bear on top of them that they have to fight. And the way to avoid the trap is to simply leave it alone. Now, the bear that it drops can be whatever you think is appropriate. It could just be a normal bear, or a conjured bear by making the trap more magical in nature, or just a zombie bear that doesn't need to eat. That way you don't have to think of the logistics of why a bear would be trapped for a long period of time in the ceiling. And at number 7, we have the Sphere of Annihilation. This is a pretty famous magical trap, where usually there is a stone face carved into a wall with a black pit in its mouth. If the PC tries to examine it, no sound will come from it, it doesn't illuminate any light, and anything they put into it seems to disappear. An Arcana check should determine that it's magical in nature, but it's usually pretty hard to figure out what exactly this black hole is. Now, the Sphere of Annihilation trap itself doesn't really do anything, unless your party decides to put a hand inside of it for whatever reason and get it instantly destroyed. It's usually used in conjunction with a puzzle in a room, where the puzzle tries to trick party members in order to stick body parts inside of it, or weapons to get them destroyed. Or sometimes it can be enchanted with a spell that compels someone to try to crawl inside its mouth, which can be removed with the simple Dispel magic. A pretty simple example of how to properly use the Sphere of Annihilation trap is to just have it right next to a secret door. It may be some kind of inscription that shows someone putting their hand inside of a creature's mouth, very similar to the Sphere of Annihilation creature statue, which would then cause the door to unlock. However, caution! The Sphere of Annihilation does destroy body parts, so if you don't want to maim your party members, probably best not to get too creative with using the sphere, because there's no say when something touches it, it just gets destroyed. And at number 6, we have the Reverse Gravity Trap. This is another magical trap in nature, and it's pretty simple to set up. Simply have a room with a really tall ceiling, but preferably one that isn't super wide. The objective is to get through a trap door on the ground, or some other similar thing. And players can notice an incredibly heavy stone slab on top of the door, as well as a crevice in the ceiling, which seems to be the perfect size in order to house that stone slab. And the trigger is simply going to the ceiling and pushing up with at least 20 pounds of force in the crevice in order to unlock the door, which can be done by just flying up to it or using the telekinesis spell to lift a stone slab into it. As soon as it's activated though, a reverse gravity spell activates in the room, which will throw everyone 100 feet into the air, crashing into the ceiling. But also, if they do not lift the stone slab, it falls with them, so they have to do a dex saving throw in order to avoid getting hit by the heavy slab. And that's basically the trap. They have 10 minutes to crawl up through the hole before it resets, in which case it closes the door and they have to do it all over again. Now, the reason I say avoid a big room is because if it's too open area, then it would be too hard for non-flying characters to climb the walls in order to get to the secret passage. But of course, if everyone can fly, then it's a pretty easy trap to circumvent. In order to adjust the difficulty level of this trap, you just want to lower or raise the ceiling's height. Characters take 1d6 damage for each 10 feet that they fall, and a maximum damage you can take from falling is 20d6. So if the ceiling is 50 feet high, for example, then that's only 5d6 damage, or 4d6 depending on how your characters argue how much they're falling. The reverse gravity spell only goes up to 100 feet, so you can't go higher than 100 feet without homebrewing the spell itself, but usually 100 feet is more than high enough. And at number 5, we have the Rolling Sphere Trap. This is another classic trap inside all forms of dungeon delving media, where basically you trigger something that causes a giant ball to roll down at you, and you have to get out of the way, otherwise it will crush you to death. However, if we take the rules from Xander's Guide of Everything on complex traps, you can get a really nice encounter out of this simple trap, which changes things up a little bit. Basically, a complex trap is like an encounter, where once the trap is triggered, everyone has to roll initiative. And at the end of the trap, you grant the party experience based on a chart located in Xander's Guide to Everything as well. The setup for this trap is a long, narrow room on a slope going downwards. And once the characters activate the trigger at the bottom of the slope, say by removing a treasure or just stepping on a pressure plate, a portal opens up at the top of the slope which lets loose the rolling ball. The ball acts on initiative count 10, and on each of its turns it travels the full length of the room. And when it gets to the other side, a portal opens up temporarily which resets it to the top of the room again. Each turn the ball is allowed to roll, it gets faster and faster, dealing more damage. And after 3 turns it reaches its maximum velocity, and will act on initiative counts 20 and 10. The way the characters can stop this is by simply blocking its path, although this will destroy most objects in its path, but could be slowed down enough so it doesn't hit its maximum velocity so early. They can also disrupt the portals with 3 Arcana checks in order to properly identify the runes and then try to mess them up so it doesn't work properly, or an equal amount of Dispel Magics, used on the different runes in the room in order to keep the portal going. Once the players are able to stop the portals, the ball will simply stop as it crashes into the wall and doesn't get reset. Or if someone manages to put out a wall of force, which will stop in its tracks immediately. Or any number of ways. A complex trap encourages a lot of creativity on how to avoid taking damage, and everyone working together in order to perform the roles necessary to disable the trap. Alternatively, the characters can just find a way to get out of there without having to deal with it at all. But also, it can just be a simple ball that rolls down a single time down the hallway, without any need for turning it into a complex trap encounter. And at number 4, we have the magical trap called the Fourth Wall Illusion. This one is just a pretty simple reiteration on a magical trap that forces you to perform a saving throw once triggered. So it could be something as simple as touching a magical rune on a wall, picking up an item which was obviously trapped, or just walking into a room which triggers it immediately. Whatever the trigger, the effect is as follows. You describe to the character that their PC awakened in a modern-day mental institution, or in a group therapy session, and the character has memories that they've been in this institution for a while, because they had 100% convinced themselves that they were inside of a game called Dungeons & Dragons, and was running around as whatever class they are, and they were on the verge of a breakthrough, with the psychiatrist running the session telling you, okay, player character, you walk into a room which casts a spell on you. What happens afterwards? The player will then have to play the character that is a version of themselves, and they now have a choice. Do they embrace this new reality and become sane, or do they reject the illusion and attempt a wisdom saving throw to get back into the game? Now, I'm sure most of the people will just make the wisdom saving throw, but if they fail, you can then give them some form of indefinite madness from the player's handbook, which mechanically speaking doesn't work any different from a normal trap which tries to cause confusion or insanity. It just opens up some role-playing elements if you do it in this way. And at number 3, we have the Poison Statue Trap. Now for this one, I'm going to set up a complex trap to really sell how a Poison Statue Trap should be used. So for this setup, we'll have a room with 4 statues in each of the corners, as well as the door that leads into the room. Inside each of the statue's eyes are 2 gems worth 200 gold each. So the trigger is simply if a character tries to pry one of those gems from the eyes. In this case, all the doors to the room will shut close and magically be locked. Then, a small little pipe will come out of all the statues' mouths and start pumping the room full of poisonous gas. At this point, everyone in the room needs to roll initiative, and then the trap will go on turns 20 and 10. On turn 20, everybody takes the poison damage on a failed Constitution save. And then every turn afterwards, the damage will go up until it reaches its maximum amount, as the room is just full of poison after 3 turns. On turn count 10, an active development happens where you roll from a random table which just adds obstacles to the room, like requiring an additional poison save, winds knocking people about, hallucinations giving them disadvantage on intelligence and wisdom saves, whatever you can think of. And the way to get out of the poisonous room is by simply plugging up all the pipes that are pumping poison, which requires successful strength checks in order to lodge something into those pipes, like a piece of cloth or whatever else you can improvise. Alternatively, you can perform a series of checks on one of the doors in order to figure out that you can disable the magical lock with a successful Arcana check to disrupt runes, and then a Thieves' Tool to unlock it with a final strength check to push the door open, all requiring full actions to accomplish so that everyone has to work together in order to do this. If the characters decide to break the statues, then the poison will just pump in faster as the pipes go underground. The room can be disabled in the 2 ways I suggested, or if the players find some other unique way to get out of the room. If there's just a lone poisonous statue trap, or even a statue trap that shoots out fire, it does work as a trap, but it's pretty easy to avoid once it triggers a single time. Just like with a complex trap with a rolling sphere, characters would get experience for successfully completing the encounter, or work towards a milestone if you don't use experience. And at number 2, we have the Illusionary Wall of Fire trap. This is a trap which combines both a magical trap and a standard mechanical one. The setup for this will be a hallway that the players need to go through, which seems to be on fire. If characters perform a few perception rolls or investigation, they should be able to notice that the fire isn't giving off heat or smoke. So if they cast Detect Magic, they should be able to sense the presence of illusion magic. So at this point, if the characters try to walk through the fire, then they take real fire damage because it was actually a real wall of fire. The illusion was just masking the heat and smoke. So trying to dispel the illusion would just simply reveal the real wall of fire, which could be dealt with however you'd put out a fire. It can also be avoided by simply using a 10-foot pole, or by throwing something into the hallway which might catch on fire and then kind of tip you off. Now I have this one at a pretty high appearance because I thought it was a very unique way to subvert expectations, especially if a group is very eager to try to detect magic everything in order to solve their problems. And at number 1, we have the ticking clock traps. These ones have become kind of famous in the D&D community recently, but the ticking clock trap functions kind of like a complex trap encounter, except the way to disable this trap is actually incredibly simple. The trigger for this trap is also pretty simple. When characters walk into a room, they might trigger some kind of pressure plate or touch something on the wall, which will cause all the doors to lock, and then there will be a small, magical clock which will appear on the ceiling or wall, which simply starts counting down from 20. And whatever triggered the clock should reset it so that it will be triggered again. And each time a party member triggers the clock, it resets to 20 seconds. And what happens if it counts down all the way to 0? Well then, the doors just open up. And that's it. All the trap does is just freak out players into thinking something bad is going to happen. The ticking clock trap by itself doesn't actually do any damage, and it doesn't danger the party in any way. But that doesn't mean dangerous things can't happen with the party members trying to figure out how to get out of the room. However, in order for this trap to work, it kind of relies on everyone in the party not knowing about it beforehand. So bringing even more attention to it by putting it in this video might accidentally work against the trap's favor. Although you can always just reiterate on the trap and actually add active components to the room, which make it seem more like a complex trap, like the rolling sphere or poison statue examples. The only trick would be that once the timer reaches 0, everything just stops. Alright, and that's the video on dungeon traps. This one was requested from the comment sections of a previous video. Hopefully you guys enjoy the way this video is presented, because the usual way of presenting a top 10 video doesn't lend itself very well to this kind of topic. As always, if you have any ideas for future videos similar to this one, or if you just have some really unique traps that I can include in a part 2, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also subscribe if you haven't already.